So talking about this the Hebdo thing over in France, and a lot of people are making comments and conclusions, and it's interesting to watch the debate between the European English speaker and the actual Americans on YouTube. YouTube, I think right now is about 70% American, 30% of English-speaking non-Americans, and of course there's a lot of YouTube in native languages of different people. But generally speaking, English-speaking side of YouTube, it's about 70% American, I believe. So the debate's been, you know, if somebody had a concealed carry permit, you would, they would have defended their office and this and that. Well, that's based on the American paradigm of an armed society as a polite society. I think that if somebody in the United States were being that offensive toward anybody's religion, and then taunting somebody constantly, and taunting and humiliating with various cartoons, various insults, most people would say, okay, these assholes are asking for it. Okay, that's what it would be. So you got to realize that when all this stuff went down in France, this is an unarmed society, is an impolite society, and there was the expectation that somebody's respect for the pen or the printing press would outweigh somebody else's respect for their ability and willingness to kick in their door and start shooting people. Well, you know, if you're making a business out of pissing people off, you're eventually going to piss people off. That's how those things work, okay? And so with these Charlie Hebdo people, they made a business out of pissing people off, and they pissed people off. They succeeded in what they're doing. Now, obviously, they got, you know, a lot of, they got some blowback from that they're not happy with, but they knew who they were pissing off, and they knew who they chose not to defend themselves against, okay? This isn't like some rappers, like the East Coast to West Coast rapper war, where these guys, you know, they'll talk shit at each other, but, you know, if somebody kicked in a door of somebody's rap studio and started shooting, somebody's probably going to shoot back. They kind of understand a little bit about how that game works. And so there's a certain level of childish insult, which the shot caller is going to say, hey, wait a minute, let's back off, because these guys are, you know, somebody might really, really get pissed off. Or they're going to really start throwing it on heavy because they understand they're going to defend themselves against it. Now, as far as the French Jews are concerned, being denied the right to keep and bear arms, because the French didn't really, they don't consider that. See, that's under Napoleonic law, where you're guilty until proven innocent. So if you're carrying a gun in France, you're either a cop or a criminal. That's how they say it. Or somebody's secret agent, right? And if you're somebody's secret agent, then they're going to consider whether you're legally, like, have diplomatic immunity, or whether you're kind of a black book agent of one kind or another, or whether a freelancer or for a particular group or organization, which may or may not have sovereign recognition. Now, there are transnational non-government groups in France which enjoy certain levels of sovereign recognition. That includes the Palestinians, okay? That includes several organizations which in the United States and internationally we would call terrorists, but in France they have certain levels of sovereign recognition. And when somebody says, hey, the French created the situation that brought about the attack on the kosher grocery store and attacks on synagogues, that's what they're referring to. There's a certain level of sovereign recognition given to a lot of these groups. So whether or not they were sneaking AKs into the country and hand grenades and trained personnel, or taking people back and forth to the training camps, they tend not to do that in country. But they were probably enjoying certain levels of sovereignty on that. They also were apparently getting fully respected sovereign territory with these Islamic Sharia law no-go zones in and around Paris. Don't forget that they also every once in a while do kind of this prayer-in protest where they block off all the streets, and you've got people getting on a pulpit talking about the supremacy of their group and their right, okay, their divine right to enslave others. Okay, and I was just having this discussion with a black Muslim. It was over at my house. We do some business with advertising cars and stuff. The most hardcore KKK guys in the United States over the last 30, 40 years, none of them would get on a pulpit and say, let's re-slave the black people. Okay? When the KKK was at its most vicious in the 1950s, nobody was saying, hey, we got an answer to the racial problem. Let's re-slave black people. Nobody, even the KKK wouldn't say that. In France and among the Islamists, the Islamic people will say that, there's a lot of them that will say that relatively openly. Okay, when they say that other people, other races, other faith will submit to us, okay, or submit to us, they're talking about enslaving people. Okay, they're talking about disarming, pacifying, and enslaving people other than themselves. And a lot of people in France think, oh, well, we'll be with the winning crowd if we just kind of collaborate with them. Well, that's another French thing, right? It's kind of like what they did in the late 30s, early 40s. And the French have had some levels of success with that. They're following what happened in the late Roman Empire. There was always some segment of Roman society that would invite the invaders in and then collaborate with them and then kind of infiltrate and influence and control them, and that's how Roman influence spread even after the fall of the empire. And there was kind of this quasi-French version of nominal Christianity that would operate that way. Now that would not the way the Spanish would operate. Interesting concept on that, because the Spanish Catholic Church and the Spanish expansion definitely worked differently. And that had a lot to do with absorbing certain Islamic teaching. In fact, they absorbed a large portion of Arabic languages too. That Spanish is actually partially an Arabic language. But the French created that situation. Okay, they created the conditions in which the Jews in France are getting attacked as an extension of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The French, of course, have been calling for the pacification of the Palestinians by telling the Israelis to give up territory in the name of peace. But there's no guarantor of peace. They're not even guaranteeing the safety of Jewish people in France. Now, with regards to somebody saying that they're going to measure their safety by how much they can taunt and insult somebody's religion, that's a little off. But we also have to realize that those people aren't Americans, okay? If you look at Europeans compared to Americans, we're growing to be very different people. Last time I visited Europe, I mean, they talk about Americans being fat or whatever. We're also on average about, 6 inches taller than those people. We're about, 30% heavier than those people. We've become genetically a little different over here in America, too, compared to a lot of those people. And they're a different animal, okay? It may be where some of our taught history comes from, but it's a different situation. So I don't know how many conclusions we can come from that, but I can tell you this. The French were asking for that stuff, okay? They asked for it. And as far as the Jews leaving France and Netanyahu, who was actually, I believe, American-born, telling him, come home to Israel, it's not a bad idea. It just, it's not always a good thing to try to stay where, you're not welcome. And the French are simply too weak-minded and they're really too weak to defend a Jewish minority. And they don't have the will to do it, okay? They didn't in World War II. They really didn't. And the French, wealthy Jews could kind of sort of buy their way to some safety among the French in World War II. There were not that many French putting their lives on the line for that when there wasn't a pretty healthy profit margin involved. In comparison to Poland, okay, there were a lot of Poles who got caught helping Jews, and the Germans would say, okay, asshole, you're in a boxcar too, and we're going to arrest your family, okay? Several members of the Catholic side of my family were executed by the Gestapo for that. And the Jewish side of the family, well, the only ones who survived were the ones that were provided with fake IDs by the Catholic Church. But, you know, it was fighting. It was real. There were people being picked up and executed. When the French, you know, no. And both my grandfathers who were in World War II, one of them came to the United States at the outset of the war, was old enough to join the U.S. Army and go back as part of the invasion of Europe. And the other one who was in a concentration camp, you know, they had a lot of contempt for French people, and there was a lot of reasons for it, a lot of valid reasons for it. So, you know, this Hebdo thing and all that, that's them. I don't know what else I could say about it. I'll dedicate a 10-minute video to them and say, gee whiz, man, I'm sorry about your cartoonists. But they you know, chose impotent shit-talking against a very powerful and dedicated enemy. Well, guess what? Impotent shit-talking doesn't win that, okay?